I had been working for Uber Eats for about 8 months when this happened, mostly doing the late night shift because that's when the surge pricing kicked in and made the whole thing actually worth it. I was a college student at the time, juggling classes during the day and deliveries at night, trying to make enough to cover rent and tuition. The money wasn't amazing, but on good nights I could pull in a decent amount, especially on weekends when people were too drunk or lazy to get their own food. It was around 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday night, which was usually pretty slow, but I had gotten a couple decent orders already. Then I got pinged for a Chinese food pickup from this place about 10 minutes away. The payout looked good, almost $30 for what seemed like a straightforward delivery to a residential area on the outskirts of town. I accepted it without thinking twice. The restaurant was one of those late-night spots that stayed open until 2 a.m., catering mostly to the bar crowd and insomniacs. I walked in, grabbed the order, which was surprisingly large, probably 4 or 5 entrees, and headed out. The delivery address was about 15 minutes away in a neighborhood I wasn't super familiar with. It was one of those newer subdivisions that had been built a few years back, with identical houses and winding streets that all looked the same. As I drove deeper into the neighborhood, I noticed how dark everything was. Most of the streetlights seemed to be out, and very few houses had their porch lights on. It gave the whole place this eerie, abandoned feeling, even though I knew people lived there. My GPS directed me to turn onto a cul-de-sac at the very end of the subdivision, where the houses backed up against a wooded area. I pulled up to the address and immediately felt something was off. The house was completely dark, no porch light, no lights visible through any windows, nothing. Every other delivery I'd done to a dark house, the customer would at least turn on a light when they knew I was arriving, or they'd be waiting outside. But this place looked genuinely empty. I checked my phone to make sure I had the right address. I did. The delivery instructions just said, "Leave at front door," which was pretty standard for contactless delivery, so I grabbed the bag of food and walked up to the house. The front yard was overgrown, which seemed odd for such a new neighborhood, and there were no cars in the driveway or visible in the garage window. I climbed the 3 steps to the front porch and set the bag down by the door, then took the required photo for the app. Just as I was about to leave, I heard something that made me freeze. It was a woman's voice, muffled and distant, coming from somewhere inside the house. She was saying something I couldn't quite make out, but her tone sounded panicked, almost pleading. I stood there for a second, unsure of what to do. Then I heard it again, louder this time. It sounded like she was saying help, but the word was distorted, like she was behind something or her mouth was covered. My heart started racing. I knocked on the door, loudly, and called out asking if everything was okay. No response. The voice had stopped. I pulled out my phone and tried calling the customer. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. Now I was really freaked out. Something was clearly wrong. I decided to walk around to the side of the house to see if I could see anything through a window. That's when I noticed the side gate was slightly open, swinging gently in the breeze. Against my better judgment, I pushed the gate open and walked into the backyard. It was even darker back there, and the trees from the woods behind the house cast long shadows across the lawn. I could see a sliding glass door that led into what looked like a living room. The curtains were partially open, and I could just barely make out shapes inside. That's when I saw movement. Someone was definitely in there, pacing back and forth in the darkness. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, but they seemed agitated, moving quickly from one side of the room to the other. I backed away from the door, suddenly feeling like I was in a place I absolutely should not be. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the customer's number. All it said was, "Wrong address, cancel order." I stared at the message, confused. Wrong address? But the app had directed me here, and the address matched what was in the system. Before I could respond, another text came through. "Get out of there. Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I practically ran back through the side gate and around to the front of the house. As I passed the front door, I noticed the bag of Chinese food I had left was gone. Someone had taken it while I was in the backyard. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I tried to start the engine. Just as I put the car in drive, I saw the front door of the house slowly open. A figure stood in the doorway, completely silhouetted against the darkness inside. They didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there watching me as I backed out of the driveway as fast as I could. I drove for about 5 minutes before I felt safe enough to pull over and catch my breath. I immediately called the police and explained the situation. The dispatcher said she would send an officer to check it out and asked me to stay on the line. While I waited, I opened the Uber Eats app to look at the order details again. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The order had been placed under the name Help Me, and the phone number wasn't even a real number, just a string of random digits that somehow got through the system. The dispatcher came back on the line and told me an officer was at the house, but it appeared to be vacant. No cars, no people, no signs of anyone living there. The Chinese food I had delivered was sitting on the front porch, untouched. I never found out what really happened that night. The police said they'd investigate, but I never heard anything back. Uber Eats support was useless, just telling me to report it through the app and they'd look into it. I tried to push it out of my mind and convince myself that maybe I had overreacted, that the voice I heard could have been a TV or something else with a reasonable explanation. But then, about a week later, I got another delivery request. Same exact address, same pickup restaurant, same payout amount. My stomach dropped when I saw it. I immediately declined the order and reported it, but it kept coming back, over and over, like someone was deliberately trying to send me there again. After the 5th time, I contacted support and demanded they block that address from my account. They finally did, but it took them 3 days of me refusing to go online because I was afraid I'd get sent there again. I quit doing Uber Eats about a month after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that something really bad had happened in that house, or was supposed to happen, and I had stumbled into the middle of it. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that woman's voice I heard, and I wonder if she was real, if she needed help, and if I should have done more. But mostly, I'm just glad I trusted my gut and got out of there when I did. To this day, I've never driven down that street again. I'd been driving for Grubhub for about 7 months at this point, working mostly weekend nights when the money was decent enough to make it worth the gas and wear on my car. My Honda Civic had seen better days, pushing close to 180,000 miles, but it ran fine and got good gas mileage, so I couldn't complain too much. That particular Saturday night started off pretty normal. I'd already completed about 6 or 7 deliveries, mostly quick runs to apartments and suburban houses, nothing out of the ordinary. Around 10:45 p.m., I accepted an order for Chinese food that would take me to the outskirts of town, near where the residential areas started turning into farmland. The payout was solid, around $25, so I figured it was worth the drive, even though it would put me pretty far from the main delivery zone. I picked up the food from the restaurant and started heading out on Route 47, a two-lane road that cut through some pretty empty areas with just scattered houses and long stretches of nothing but fields. I was maybe 10 minutes into the drive, still about 5 miles from the customer's address, when I noticed my temperature gauge creeping up into the red zone. That's never a good sign. I turned off the AC and cracked the windows, hoping that would help, but within another minute, the engine started making this awful knocking sound. Before I could even pull over, steam started pouring out from under the hood, and my car just died. I managed to coast onto the shoulder, but that was it. Engine completely gone. I sat there for a second, just staring at the dashboard in disbelief. This was literally the worst possible place for this to happen. There were no streetlights out here, just darkness on both sides of the road, and I hadn't seen another car pass by in at least 5 minutes. I tried turning the key a few more times, but the engine wouldn't even turn over. It was completely dead. First thing I did was call the customer and explain what happened. They weren't happy about it, obviously, but they said they understood and would just reorder from somewhere else. Then I called Grubhub support, which was basically useless. They just told me to mark the delivery as unable to complete and suggested I contact roadside assistance. Great advice. My roadside assistance, through my insurance, had about a 2-hour wait time, which I expected. It was Saturday night, so everyone and their mother probably needed a tow. I texted my roommate to see if he could come get me, but he was at a party on the other side of the city and had been drinking, so that was a no-go. I was pretty much stuck there until the tow truck showed up. I decided to just wait it out in the car with the doors locked. I put on my phone flashlight and set it on the dashboard, facing out so that passing cars could see me better, and I started scrolling through social media to kill time. The Chinese food was still in the passenger seat, and since it wasn't getting delivered, I figured I might as well eat some of it. At least something good would come out of this disaster. About 20 minutes into waiting, I saw headlights approaching from behind me. A pickup truck slowed down as it passed, and I could see the driver looking over at my car. For a second, I thought they might stop to help, but they just kept going. A few minutes later, though, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror again. At first, I thought it was another car coming down the road, but then I realized it was the same pickup truck. It had turned around and was coming back. The truck pulled up behind me, about 20 feet back, and just sat there with its headlights on. I couldn't see who was inside because of the glare, but after a minute, the driver's door opened and someone got out. It was a man, probably in his 40s or 50s, wearing a baseball cap and a flannel shirt. He walked up to my window and knocked on it. I cracked the window maybe an inch and asked if I could help him. He said he'd seen me broken down and wanted to know if I needed a jump or any help. I told him no, that my engine had overheated and I was waiting for a tow truck, but thanks anyway. He stood there for a second, looking at me through the window, then said that it wasn't safe for me to be sitting out here alone and that he could give me a ride into town if I wanted. Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. Maybe it was the fact that he'd driven past me once and then deliberately turned around to come back. Or maybe it was just the isolated location and the late hour, but my gut was telling me not to get out of that car. I politely declined, saying the tow truck would be there soon, and I'd rather just wait. He didn't seem happy about that answer. He started insisting, saying it could be hours before the tow truck actually showed up, and that it really wasn't safe for a young woman to be sitting out here alone at night. That's when I noticed he kept looking at the food in my passenger seat, like he was trying to figure out what I was doing out here. I told him again, more firmly this time, that I was fine and didn't need help. He took a step back from my car, but didn't leave. Instead, he just stood there on the shoulder, staring at me. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, he walked back to his truck. I thought he was going to leave, but he didn't. He got back in the driver's seat and just sat there, engine running, headlights still pointed at my car. I started to panic a little. I checked my phone to see how much longer the tow truck would be, but it still said about an hour and a half. I thought about calling 911, but what would I even say? Some guy stopped to help me, and now he won't leave? That didn't seem like enough to warrant an emergency call, but I was definitely freaked out. Then the man got out of his truck again. This time he walked right up to my door and tried the handle. My heart nearly stopped. Thank God I'd locked the doors. He pulled on the handle a few more times, harder each time, then started knocking on the window aggressively, telling me to open the door. I yelled at him to leave me alone and pulled out my phone, threatening to call the police. That seemed to make him angry. He started pounding on the window with his fist, hard enough that I was genuinely worried the glass might break. I was screaming at him to get away, fumbling with my phone to dial 911. Just as I got the call connected, he suddenly stopped. He looked down the road and I followed his gaze to see headlights approaching in the distance. The man quickly walked back to his truck, got in, and sped off in the opposite direction before the other car even reached us. The car that had scared him off just drove right past me without stopping, probably didn't even notice what had just happened. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The 911 operator asked me what my emergency was, and I tried to explain what had just happened, but I was crying and my words were all jumbled. She stayed on the line with me and said she was sending a police officer to my location right away. The cop showed up about 15 minutes later, which felt like an eternity. I told him everything that had happened, gave him a description of the truck and the man as best I could remember. He said he'd keep an eye out and drive around the area to see if he could spot the vehicle, but he wasn't optimistic. He stayed with me until the tow truck arrived another hour later. The whole ride to the impound lot, I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if that other car hadn't come down the road when it did. Would he have broken my window? Would he have hurt me? The tow truck driver noticed I was shaken up and asked if I was okay, and I just said I'd had a rough night. My car needed a whole new engine, which basically totaled it given how old it was. I couldn't afford to fix it, so I ended up selling it for scrap. I stopped doing Grubhub after that. The money wasn't worth the risk anymore, not after experiencing how vulnerable you can be out there on your own. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm driving alone after dark, and I'm just grateful that I trusted my instincts and kept those doors locked. I'd been working delivery for a local Thai restaurant for about 5 months at this point, mostly taking the closing shift since it paid a bit more, and I didn't mind driving around late at night. Most nights were pretty chill, just dropping off pad Thai and spring rolls to people watching Netflix in their apartments. This particular Friday night started off normal enough. I'd already done maybe 6 or 7 deliveries, and around 11:30 p.m., I got an order for the other side of town, about 20 minutes away. The payout was decent, and the restaurant was right off Interstate 94, so I'd just hop on the highway for a few exits and get off near the customer's neighborhood. I grabbed the food, which smelled amazing, and headed out. The highway was pretty empty at that hour, just a few scattered cars here and there. I merged on and settled into the right lane, keeping it at a steady 65. About 2 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights coming up fast behind me in my rearview mirror. I mean really fast. The car swerved from the left lane into mine and slammed on their brakes right behind me, close enough that I could barely see their headlights. My heart jumped. What the hell? I hadn't cut anyone off or done anything wrong. I figured maybe they were just some idiot trying to scare me, so I tried to ignore it and kept driving. But they stayed right on my bumper, so close I thought they were going to hit me. Every time I tapped my brakes even slightly, they'd get even closer. I was starting to get really uncomfortable. My exit was coming up in about 3 miles, so I just kept telling myself to stay calm and get off the highway. Maybe they'd keep going straight and leave me alone. When my exit came up, I put on my turn signal and moved into the exit lane. The car behind me followed. Okay, now I was actually getting scared. Once I got off the highway, I turned onto the main road that led into the neighborhood. The car was still behind me, but now they were flashing their high beams on and off repeatedly. I had no idea what this person wanted from me. The neighborhood I was delivering to was only about a mile down this road, so I kept driving, hoping they'd turn off somewhere, but they didn't. They followed me all the way to the neighborhood entrance. That's when I really started to panic. I wasn't about to lead this psycho directly to the customer's house, so I turned onto a random street in the neighborhood instead of going to the actual address. The car followed me down the street, and then suddenly they turned off all their lights. Complete darkness. I could barely make out their shape behind me anymore, but I knew they were still there. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I had no idea what to do. I thought about calling 911, but I was too scared to take my hands off the wheel or my eyes off the road. I turned onto another street, driving deeper into the neighborhood, and the car stayed right behind me in the darkness. Then I saw a house up ahead with all their lights on and a car in the driveway. Without thinking, I pulled into their driveway and laid on my horn, hoping someone would come outside or at least look out the window. The car behind me pulled in right next to me, blocking me in on the left side of the driveway. Before I could even react, the driver's door flew open and a guy jumped out. He was maybe in his 30s, wearing a hoodie, and he immediately started yelling at me. His words were all slurred together and barely made sense. Something about me cutting him off miles back, which I definitely hadn't done. I could tell he was either drunk or high or both. I kept my doors locked and my windows up, just sitting there frozen. Then he reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out what looked like a box cutter. He started banging on my window with it, screaming at me to get out of the car. The blade caught the streetlight, and I could see it clearly. That's when pure terror set in. I threw my car into reverse and slammed on the gas, backing out of the driveway as fast as I could. The guy lunged toward my car, but I was already moving. He chased me down the driveway, still yelling and waving the box cutter around like a maniac. I could see him in my rearview mirror, running after me into the street. I drove down the block as fast as I could, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I turned onto another street, and then another, trying to lose him. After a few minutes, I didn't see his car anymore, so I pulled over on a random street and tried to catch my breath. My whole body was shaking. I immediately called the customer and explained that I couldn't deliver their food because of a dangerous situation. They were actually really understanding and asked if I was okay. Then I called my manager and told him what happened. He said to forget about the rest of my deliveries and just go home. and that he'd handle everything with the customers. But I was too scared to drive anywhere yet. What if that guy was still out there looking for me? So I called 911 and explained everything to the dispatcher. She asked me if I could describe the car or get a license plate, but everything had happened so fast and it was so dark that I didn't get a good look. She said she'd send an officer to patrol the area and asked me to stay where I was. About 10 minutes later, a cop showed up and I told him the whole story. He took down all the details and said he'd drive around the neighborhood to see if he could spot the car, but he wasn't optimistic. He followed me out of the neighborhood and made sure I got back onto the highway safely. When I got home, I couldn't even sleep. I just kept replaying the whole thing in my mind, especially the moment when he pulled out that box cutter. The look in his eyes was just pure rage. I had no idea what he would have done if I hadn't backed out of that driveway when I did. The next day, my manager called me to check in. He said the customer from last night had actually called the restaurant to make sure I was okay, which was really nice of them, but he also said I should probably take a few days off to recover. I ended up taking a whole week. When I finally went back to work, I told my co-workers what had happened. Most of them believed me, but a couple of them seemed skeptical, like they thought I was exaggerating or something. I guess it does sound kind of crazy when you say it out loud, but I know what I experienced and it was absolutely terrifying. I quit that job about a month later. Every time I got an order that required taking the highway, I'd start to panic. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might follow me again. It just wasn't worth the money anymore. To this day, I'm still paranoid when I'm driving alone at night. I constantly check my rearview mirror, and if a car gets too close behind me, my heart starts racing. I have no idea what that guy's problem was, or why he targeted me that night, but I'm just grateful I trusted my instincts and got out of there when I did.